Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is The Beam, and we are looking at the US presidential election. That's our core focus. The US election is one of the most widely watched events affecting economic policies, international relations, and even domestic politics worldwide, with the Electoral College playing a decisive role. American voters indirectly decide who leads the country, a system rooted in their federal structure to balance popular sentiments and state interest. Like others before, it is just about voting, but about the potential milestones, also about the potential milestones and historical changes that may reshape America's domestic landscape and foreign relations. We could be seeing a new president set, whereby age policy directions of diversity for Nigeria and Africa are going to be at play. We're joined today for this very important discussion by none other than a very seasoned political analyst who happens to be the executive director of Yaga Africa, Mr. Samson Itodo. You're welcome to the program today.
Thank you very much. And I guess it's afternoon in Nigeria. So good afternoon, but it's morning here in DC.
Yes, good afternoon and good morning to you. You are there right now and you are monitoring, observing what is going on in the political landscape over there. So let's begin with that very important question. What have you witnessed so far when it comes to voter behavior and election administration?
Oh, there's so much that we've observed since we arrived in the US. So let's look at the conduct of early voting. One of the policies and practices in the US is early voting. So early voting allows registered voters to cast their vote prior to election day, which is November 5th. And the reason why early voting is introduced in the US system is to allow people ease the process of voting, because on election day, it will decongest the polling stations, but also give people an opportunity who maybe by virtue of their work will not be available on election day. Because in the US, there's no restriction of movement on election day. Election day in some states is not a public holiday. And so people are able, to cast their vote. And so far, over 70 million of the about 150 million people who are expected to cast their vote, have voted. In Nigeria, soonest, the National Assembly is currently considering an early voting bill, especially in the Senate, sponsored by Senator Adua. And that will open up the process to allow security agencies, medical practitioners, election observers cast their votes before election day. The second big sort of observation is the issue-based campaigns that have shaped this election. That despite all the political intrigues, we have three key issues that will shape the way voters are going to cast their vote. And you can even say four. The first one is the economy. The second one is immigration. The third one is reproductive rights, and specifically abortion. One other issue that will shape the election is about Gaza. So you listen to the debates and you listen to the campaigns, you see how both the voters are so well conscientized to the extent that they are focused more on the fundamental issues. And so we're seeing, single issue voters. Americans are either voting for abortion rights or they are voting for immigration, or even how the US has handled the Israeli and Gaza conflict. And that's so one of the things that we've observed. Another issue is the US is such a decentralized system of elections. You have 50 states. Each of these states have their own separate electoral commissions. They have their own electoral laws and guidelines because of the devolved nature. And you look at the way the elections are managed. They are managed by what you call the secretaries of the State Board of Elections. And in some states, these secretaries are elected. They are not appointed. They are elected, but they are still able to perform their function with the highest level of transparency and accountability. One interesting thing from this election, which is a huge source of concern, is you see how, the issue of accepting electoral outcomes has come up in this election, and there are doubts and distrust in the system because, one of the parties and the candidates seem to have questioned the transparency of the process in some of the states. And that really puts electoral integrity and transparency, to test in this election.
It's beautiful that you have brought that, because I was going to speak to you and say, hey, what have you seen as regards the integrity of the process so far? Are you trusting it? Is it playing out in a way that in the end you feel that, hey, the results are going to be what the people have gone to vote for, what the American people have decided? What have you seen? Is there something that is really distressing for you when it comes to the integrity of the election?
It's nothing distressing when it comes to the integrity of the elections. I think the fact that you have varied or decentralized rules governing different aspects of the electoral process, in other words, because you don't have uniformity in the process, unlike what you have in Nigeria and actually in most parts of Africa, there are bound to be either miscommunication or misunderstanding of the rules as it applies to the state. Because the US electoral system, quite frankly, is very, very complex. Because in some places you would see the mode of voting is different from another state, and there are all of this. But if you think about transparency, the heart of transparency, is openness, is accountability. And even though the secretaries of the boards of elections are elected, in other words, they represent a particular political, view or party, they are still able to be transparent in managing the process because you have poll watchers. In one of the polling places I went to, both in Atlanta, in Virginia, and in Washington, D.C. and Maryland, the whole process was open. It was transparent. There are two options for voters to cast their vote. You either vote by hard paper ballots, and if you want to vote electronically, you can vote electronically at the polling place. There are several options. So it's open. I don't see any issue relating to the transparency of the process. They've been concerned about voter fraud in some of the battleground states, which is expected because due to the Electoral College, you have battleground states. And in this case, it's the states of Pennsylvania, which, analysts have said will determine this election, or Michigan, or Wisconsin, Nevada, the state of Georgia. These states are battleground states. It's highly competitive, in those states. And so the political actors, the two major political parties, are oversighting this process and watching those states carefully. And so if there's a misunderstanding in the rules, you might have some accusation or allegation with respect to the transparency of the process.
All right.
But so far, we are satisfied with the level of transparency, and there's so much that Nigeria can learn on how to be transparent with its electoral processes.
We're going to go on a break shortly, and we'll come back to that point.